There's other stories up and down the flight line where heroism was taking place. And Jeannie has done such a masterful job with her book of capturing some of that and really, particularly what's going on in the air. Not just the ground, but what's going on in the air, because by the time we're reacting, they're inside the wire. And when the attack first took place and it was announced, we had a bomber come overhead. We had the CJ, in fact, the three-star Air Force commander who was down in Qatar pushed a bunch of aircraft overhead Bastion Leatherneck, which was great. Appreciate the support, but they were danger close. They were in close proximity to friendlies that we could not use. You can't use a big old bomber dropping bombs inside our fence line. And that's where our Marines sprung into action. Despite the fact that they were under fire, they were launching aircraft to go repel the attack. And in the end, they were the ones, there were some amazing things taking place on the ground. When you read about Major McDonald, who is now Colonel McDonald in this book, you're like, holy cow, this guy is amazing. And then you read about people like Lieutenant Colonel Lightfoot and Captain Coker and what they're doing in the air with the air-to-ground munitions. They basically saved the day. So up and down the flight line that night, and I'm getting goosebumps as I think about what happened that night. Up and down the flight line, Marines put down their wrenches, picked up their weapons, and then they turned to the east and they fought for each other. Why does this story need to be told today? All right, and I think one of the reasons this story needs to be told today, I mean, there are lessons learned, and I will tell you, right after the attack took place, the Commandant was quick to put this out as lessons learned. And Major General Gerganis and I basically got crucified for lack of, they put us in a bad light intentionally, right? My former aide-de-camp was going to school out of Monterey, and he was in a class and they were going through this attack. And they were talking about how jacked up Major General Gerganis and Sturdevant was, and on and on and on. And my former aide, Christopher, and I won't give you his last name, but Christopher says, time out. I was there the night that this took place, and none of what you just said is accurate. So they took advantage of that opportunity to try and use it as a teaching point, but they were missing out on it was the wrong teaching point, okay? The teaching point that should have taken place then, and General Capewell does talk about it in the book, right? When you've got different countries coming together, you've got the, which is important, right? When you have coalition partners, it's kind of sticky, but it's got to be ironed out and it's got to be ironclad. There can't be any gaps in the understanding of who's doing what, all right? So there's that piece. The security piece, I was thinking about this yesterday as I was preparing to have this conversation. And, I think back to my days in Afghanistan in March of 2002. And we were up at Bagram, all right? And I was off the ship. I'd taken a portion of my squadron up to Bagram to support the 10th Mountain, 2nd Brigade, 10th Mountain. And General Hagenbeck was the commanding general of 10th Mountain Brigade. But at one point, we had a battalion's worth of soldiers, Army soldiers, that were pretty much there on the base for most of the time. And there came a point when I found out that they were leaving that I got really concerned. Because at that point in time, Bagram was open. There was no fence around Bagram. It was an old Russian air base. The runway had been cratered. The Air Force was in repairing the craters in the runway. C-17s were coming in. And because of hostile fire, they were having to spiral down to the runway, and when they took off, they'd have to do a really steep climb out, and they would spiral up so they didn't take enemy fire. And the runway was fairly short because it was still under repair. But when I found out that battalion worth of soldiers were leaving, I started doing the math and looking around Bagram Airfield and realized there wasn't a whole lot of people there. There just were not going to be, there was a headquarters element, and most of us are in a old hangar, a bombed out hangar that we were using for the headquarters with the general, but there weren't a lot of people that were there to provide security for the tenants on board that base. So I got all my Marines together, and we ranged from 46, I think was the low, up to about 70 Marines total. And I told them, here's what's going on. and we were at risk because every night there would, you'd hear there'd be random fire through the base or an RPG would go by, having no idea where it was coming from or where it was directed, but there was random fire taking place, and that was a bit of a concern. So, I said, hey, Marines, we've got to dig fighting positions. And we did. We dug fighting holes as if we were setting up a perimeter defense around our little housing area, our general purpose tents, to make sure that if something were to happen, we were able to run out of our tents and get into fighting positions and have clear fields of fire set up so that we didn't shoot a friendly in the course of trying to defend ourselves. So where I'm going with that was, I quickly realized there in March of 2002 that you cannot outsource your security. And I think that's one of the things that was one of the biggest takeaways from the Bastion Leatherneck Shorebach attack was we had faith and confidence in another service from another country that they would do their job. And we didn't have a lot of control over that. And that I think is a mistake. I think if I had to do that over again, and I would think General Gorganis would do the same thing, he would argue that. And he did. That's one of the things that you point out in your book that I failed to mention earlier. He had a revised memorandum of understanding in 2012 because it needed to be refreshed because our posture on the airfield had changed. And Mark had that out there, and the ESG refused to approve it. So once again, we're trying to make improvements to improve the command and control piece because we in the Marine Corps believe in unity of command. So there can only be one person in charge, okay? And I worked for Major General Gorganis, and there was another Major General and a Brigadier General over there that we all worked for General Gorganis, and we understand that. And he could, his command and control role, he could, even though we were the commanders, we still had a conversation with him. If we were trying to do something, I'd always bounce it off the boss if it was something controversial to let him know what he was doing, at least make sure he understood what was happening. So I think in today's world, we continue to, you have to recognize that coalitions are absolutely essential to our success. And that's for a number of reasons. So the U.S. isn't going alone, but they understand that we're the good guys. Our coalition are there for the right reason. And then you have to make sure that everybody understands the roles and responsibilities and the various caveats that each country has, because there are certain things we can do that the Brits can't do. There are things that they can do that we can't do, the Australians, so on and so on. So I think there are lessons learned, and I think you need to go back. And when you read this book, and why is it important to be read in 2024? For starters, it goes back to the actions of the individual Marines up and down the flight line on September the 14th of 2012. That's number one. Number two is the complexity of the situation in which we were dealing with, because you see that today in what's going on in the Middle East, and it's going to continue to be an issue. One of the things I didn't talk about was the why behind General Amos initiated an investigation 8 months after the attack. And I've got some personal opinions on that, and I'm not going to share it. Not today anyway. But what I will say, the unfortunate part about this attack not receiving more attention when it happened is, it's unfortunate because the amount of the different heroic acts that were taking place up and down the flight line that night really went virtually unnoticed for 12 years. Almost 12 years, right? This September will be 12 years. So 11 and a half years before this stuff actually comes to light. And like I said a few minutes ago, there were other actions taking place up and down the flight line, people that did get recognized for awards. And I will tell you, some of what we fought against, where there was a system in place where I tried to get people certain awards and they were either downgraded or disapproved. And that's unfortunate because I was so proud and continue to be, and will be up until the day I die, be so proud of how the Marines reacted that particular night, right? And it wasn't just that night. We had a very successful deployment. We had 2 rotations split in half over that 12-month period, and I had an amazing staff and some superb squadron commanders that led amazing young Marines and sailors. So unfortunately, this story wasn't told when it was still fresh in people's minds, but it needs to be told today because, for one, so that people understand exactly what happened that night. They understand the truth, all right? One of my favorite lines in Jeannie's book is at the very beginning, and it says, "Truth lives in silence until it's set free." And that's exactly what this book does. Sets the truth free and allows people to understand exactly what happened the night of September the 14th of 2012 and the amazing response from the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing Forward Marines.